Kentucky Fried Chicken, a restaurant brimming with Southern influence and industry, a place where people go for easily priced and convenient chicken. We all know these aspects of KFC and we see them every day. But to further understand KFC, we ask the question, what influences the image of KFC, and how has its history established what it is today? Kentucky Fried Chicken has been a revolutionary component of the fast food industry, but without influences including the history of Colonel Sanders, the ownership of KFC, and foreign cultures where KFC has expanded, it would not be where it is today, molding the fast food industry as we know it.
Our first source by Gale Virtual Reference Library is a biography that mainly discusses the life of Colonel Sanders. Sanders grew up very poor, his family struggled, and it was up to Sanders to provide for his family shortly after his father died. At a young age, he knew he had to make something of himself. During the Great Depression, he wanted to start a business that would be recession-proof. He found that food and gasoline was his best option and that the chicken was a success and led people coming back for more. According to Gale's article, quote, with nothing to lose, Sanders took his spices and pressure cooker and traveled throughout the United States in his 1964 Ford. He visited restaurants trying to convince owners to use his recipe, unquote. Gale's reference to the trials and tribulations leads into what his restaurant would and could be. Gale's article shows how he wouldn't stop at anything and how he had a vision to sell his spices so that everyone could have a taste of his secret recipe. Overall, utilizing the history of Sanders, Gale paints the image of Colonel Sanders' culture that would eventually integrate itself into the original recipe served today. I interviewed Lizzie Brock. She and I are both from Eastern Kentucky, and considering the first original KFC was founded in a small little town called Corbin, located in Eastern Kentucky, it is a huge favorite. And so I wanted to ask her questions that were basically based on how it has impacted Americans and how they act at the dinner table. When you hear Kentucky Fried Chicken, what exactly comes to mind?
Sunday night dinners with my family growing up on the farm where I was raised and just grabbing it on the way home. And since there's so many people in my family, you really had to get a lot of it.
So whenever someone asks you what the culture is, like the traditions that are displayed through KFC, what would you say they are?
I would say very Southern style, like ma and pa home cooking with a lot of different, he's known for his herbs and spices and just focusing on Colonel Sanders and his recipe that he started. So I think it's neat that they keep that going, even though it's been a really long time.
As shown in this interview, we see how KFC has impacted Americans, and even more so, Kentuckians. When asked what comes to mind when hearing KFC, Lizzie reflected on the good memories with her family, which is important because it displays how the history and vision of Colonel Sanders has impacted Americans by truly delivering a home-cooked feel to the dinner table.
Further exploring the history of Kentucky Fried Chicken is this image. This picture took place around the 1960s in Austin, Texas at one of their franchises. Pictured are people lining up waiting in line for KFC chicken at a stand. It also says 7th anniversary special, which shows the audience that his business has had success and is a classic go-to for dinner. As you can see, the picture says hamburgers under what is titled Kentucky Fried Chicken. Around the first couple years, Sanders would sell majority of his franchises to the small cafes that sold his recipe. Not only adults, but children are pictured at the stand, which signifies that it was a family favorite. KFC revolutionized the fast food industry. When the reader sees the word hamburgers directly under Kentucky Fried Chicken, confusion is more than likely going to occur. However, Harlan Sanders started out his franchises by selling his recipe to small cafes. This is where he was profiting a nickel for each individual chicken sold. Sanders was hustling to get his business out there as far as traveling and selling his recipe out of a stand. Consumers supported his business because there's a line out the door and it was a 7th anniversary special. This was taken 4 years before Sanders sold his business to John Y. Brown. The face of Colonel Sanders has impacted the food chain industry because he was the only man to ever introduce the traditional Southern home fried chicken to the fast food business. His iconic recipe stood out and left people coming back for more, as well as it was a family favorite and loved by everyone.
Our second source, an article by Poultry World, focuses on KFC's second owner, John Y. Brown Jr., and his marketing strategies. This article says John Y. Brown is known as, quote, the man who built Kentucky Fried Chicken from a small chain of restaurants into a multinational company, end quote. In just 7 years, he helped flip the market cap from $2 million to $281 million. Having Colonel Sanders remain the face of the company and the decision to become international are the two essential parts of Brown's marketing strategy. In countries such as China and Japan, KFC adapted their menu to whatever culture they were in. For example, they would sell rice cakes and noodles instead of French fries to better adhere to the people while still maintaining the Kentuckian aspect of KFC. This picture signifies the foundation and culture of Kentucky Fried Chicken. Pictured from left to right are two unidentified men, Colonel Sanders, Governor John Y. Brown Jr., John Y. Brown Sr., UK Vice President Ray Hornback, and Chancellor of Medical Center Peter Bosworth. Colonel Sanders, even after selling his company in 1964, is still such a big part of KFC due to the fact that his face remains the image of the brand. This makes him stand out compared to other companies as the only fast food chain to have the owner also as the face of the company. Although he made a huge impact in the fast food industry, he didn't do it alone. This photo attests to it because the people next to him also played key roles into making Kentucky Fried Chicken into the brand we know and love today.
This corporate impact from KFC also led to an expansion overseas that is outlined within our next article. Kentucky Fried Chicken was one of the first fast food restaurants to move overseas, and in doing so, it would experience a huge amount of success. KFC was intent on blending that traditional Kentuckian culture with the diverse reality of countries overseas. They would keep the original Colonel's recipe, but shift different aspects of the restaurant to adhere to their consumer base. This would translate into the blending of cultures that made KFC so incredibly popular. As Dana outlines in his article, quote, "At the ornate Dongfang Hotel, there was an elaborate menu including Miranda orange-flavored soft drink, Tsingtao beer, and mango juice," unquote. This displays the large impact that those foreign cultures had on KFC and how they bended their very restaurant for their consumers. It also points out the culturalization and integration of foreign ideas within the KFC restaurant chain. Without this blend of cultures and the standpoint of the Kentucky aspect of KFC in these cultures, KFC would not have had the success they do today in these areas. From this expansion of KFC culture, we have a visualization which highlights the different blends of culture from Kentucky Fried Chicken. This photo source displays a typical city scene in Japan, a suited man tirelessly dragging his 2 children along the sidewalk, the large crowd behind the man, the cars parked on the side with their parking meters running down, and the silhouetted man indicating a crosswalk. However, what is not typical about this image is the immortalization of Colonel Sanders in a Santa suit. The triple-chinned, overweight Sanders seems as though he's in a place where he doesn't belong, but it's just the opposite. This is a pure example of that blending of cultures previously mentioned. The goatee, the glasses, the smile, it's all there, but the difference is the location and the meaning. This exemplifies just how KFC integrated itself into these foreign cultures and the standpoint that KFC created within these cultures. They made sure to adhere to their customers, but also push that Kentucky American culture to draw those in that were interested in tasting something exotic or maybe even fancy. It also exemplifies the integration of foreign cultures in KFC and how Colonel Sanders also played a role. What may be barely noticeable is the rose on his collar, which in Japan represents blossoming love and passion, and indicates that it was placed to show the loving embrace of the Colonel's chicken. This is also supported because, as you can see, Colonel Sanders is standing with his arms open as though to welcome anyone that wishes to get a taste. This is an important aspect because it visually details the elaborate impact that foreign culture had on KFC and the impact that KFC had on that very culture. The importance of culture blending and the effects that it had are personified through an experience we have obtained in an interview. In this next interview, I talk with Jacob Blakely about his experience in a mission trip in the Philippines over this last summer. He goes into detail talking about some of the families and how KFC has integrated itself into their lives. But then he also goes in and talks about how the Philippines has shifted the way that Kentucky Fried Chicken has presented their menu. So what kind of experiences have you had with KFC?
Well, this one time I went to the Philippines with my church, Mount Zion. I used to play basketball for them all the time, but I went over to the Philippines on a missionary trip, and the kids and I were playing soccer, and one of the kids' mom had walked over, and she had asked the little kid if they wanted to go to KFC, and the little kid was like really super excited, and I explained to him that I was from Kentucky, and I was like, hey, like, I'm from Kentucky, where that originated from. Like, that's where the headquarters are. And every one of them just like came over and like kind of like ganged up on me and was like asking me questions like, hey, do you know who Colonel Sanders? Like, do you know him personally? And like they were like, hey, do you know the recipe? Can you give us the recipe and whatnot? And they just found that it was just the most amazing thing ever, as like we would look at as like a fancy restaurant or Malone's or something like that.
Based on those experiences, what is your perception of KFC?
Well, like I said earlier, like it's really awesome how KFC like went over there, and like those kids look at it as like the best thing ever. Like we over here, we take advantage of it and we don't. It's like our everyday life, but like over there, it's like they might not have it as much, and they see it as, like I said, like a fancy restaurant or whatnot. And it's just crazy how everything started in Kentucky, and it's grown
So we've heard a little bit about how KFC has affected their lives. How do you think they have affected KFC and their culture?
Oh boy, it's really different over there. Like over here, like the menu is just basically based off of American culture and whatnot. But over there, like I had to ask some of the people over there, like, what was that? Like they had like a rice cake, and I had no idea what that was. And they had a lot of different sodas that I've never seen before, and it's like I had to ask them. And there was a lot of juices too, like coconut juice, and I mean it's just a lot of different fruit juices and whatnot. So I feel like that culture over there has changed that KFC pretty a lot actually.
As shown in this interview, the culture of KFC is very apparent, its success being accredited to the blending of cultures by KFC. The first question delved into his experience with this blending, and the anecdote he provides is a key aspect. It outlines the impact of KFC on their culture and the effects that it has had on the way they think about Kentucky. Regarding his response to his perspective on fast food is another unique aspect to consider because it explores how his experiences with KFC and the culture he has witnessed resulted in a better view. Finally, one of the most important aspects of the interview is his mention of the exotic menu, which displays a new KFC, one that he's been to before but not one he recognizes. The exotic drinks, food, and culture displays that blend that KFC has tried to achieve and what has made it successful today. Overall, KFC has had many different impacts throughout time and culture, but through that time and culture, KFC has also changed the way they've served their famous chicken. Thus, based upon the research, the history of Colonel Sanders, the multiple ownerships for the evolution of KFC, and the cultures that KFC has explored are impacts that have altered their style and built their success that they have today.